Hi there. In this video, we've got a table of daily sales, and what we want a calculation of the sales growth from the equivalent day 1 week previous. So here for the first 7 days, we won't really get anything, but every day after that, we want this Tuesday's total sales. We want to know what its growth is from the equivalent previous Tuesday. Okay, this is sort of a simple, or not a simpler, a slightly more complicated version of what we did in the previous video, but I think it'll drill the idea in pretty well. So let's go ahead and get started. We're here in referencing previous steps.xlsx. We're in the same day last week sheet. So here's the data we want to work with. So let's click on it, head up to Power Query, and get our data from a table. Okay, first step, we're going to add a column that has the current row index. So we're going to add an index column, and we're going to start from 0. Okay, I'm going to change, set up here to view. I'm going to make sure I've got the formula bar, and I'm going to change the name of this from index to current row ID, and hit enter. Okay, so now currently whatever number is in here is equivalent to that row's row ID. So what we want is the row ID for the equivalent previous week. So we're going to add a custom column, and we're going to call this PW for previous week, row ID, and so that's just the current row ID minus 7, which is 7 rows or 7 days back. We'll go ahead and click OK. So now each one of these refers to the ID for that equivalent row, and the previous row ID refers to the row from 1 week before. So this here is equivalent to that row right there, row 0. Notice for all these we've got negative numbers here, so these won't work, and we'll run into that in just a second. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to grab the total sales from the day 1 week before. So let's go ahead and we'll do this step by step. We're going to add a custom column. Step 1, we're going to call this total sales 1 week ago, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we're going to start off, we're going to do this step by step. We're going to grab the entire table from the previous step. Okay, so we're going to do added custom. We're going to grab the entire table right now. I'm going to click OK. So now each one of these little tables is this entire bigger table, right? And the reason we built those is because we want to grab the row from not the current day, but the equivalent day 7 days ago, which is this previous week row ID right here. So we're going to use this previous week row ID to grab that row from this table. So we're going to grab an entire row, which means we use curly braces. Well, which row do we want to grab? Do we want to grab the first row? No. Do we want to grab the second row? No. We want to grab the equivalent row from the previous week. So let's go ahead and click OK. And if you'll notice here, for every day starting here on I guess the 8th day, we actually have a record, and for every row previous, we have an error. The reason is, if we try and grab row -1, well, that doesn't make sense because there is no row -1. We can't grab row -2 or -7, any of those, so we get this error. Lots of ways to handle this. What we're going to do is, if the previous row didn't exist, or if that row ID doesn't exist in the previous table, we're just going to grab the current row. The result being, when we finally do our calculations, the growth for the first 7 days is just going to be 0. So we're going to do a try. So go ahead and try that. And if that doesn't work, what I want you to do is don't grab the row from the previous week row ID. Grab it with the current row ID. Okay? We're going to go ahead and click OK. So now this record refers to this data right here, and this record refers to this data right there, and this record refers to this data right there. I think you're getting the idea. And also for these first 7, like this first one refers to this right here, all the way up through 7, where it refers to the current row. Okay, so now all we have to do is grab the total sales from each one of these records. Well, that's pretty easy to do. We could do this in multiple steps, but I actually kind of like squeezing this all into one step. So we'll head back here to our gear icon. So right now we're grabbing the entire record. Well, we don't want the entire record. We just want the total sales value from each one of these records. So we're going to this whole part here returns the record, and by adding this total sales, we're going to grab the total sales value from each one of those records. Total sales. Okay, I'm going to click OK. And so now we can go ahead and remove these because we don't need them anymore. So left click there, shift click there, right click, remove columns. This is a little bit harder to see, but if we head over here to the 8th day, the total sales for that day, well, that's just whatever that was when we started, but the total sales from 1 week ago is 5272.57, which is the equivalent of 1 week ago, 5272.57. Except for here, this first week, where there really isn't sales from 1 week ago. I mean, it probably exists, but it doesn't exist in our source table. So we just got the equivalent sales for that day. Okay, now that we've got that, we can do our growth calculation. Slightly more difficult than sales change, although not much. So we're going to call this total sales growth from day 1 week ago. Call it, I don't know, it's not really the best name I've ever come up with, but it does convey the idea nicely. So we're going to take, this is a fairly easy calculation. We're going to take the current total sales, we're going to subtract the total sales from 1 week ago, and we're going to divide that whole thing by the total sales from 1 week ago. And that should give us the growth. So click OK. And there we go. Okay, so for the first 7 days, we have a growth of 0. And I don't know, maybe you want to change that to something else, or maybe even just delete these first 7 rows. That's not a bad way to go about it. Because this is sort of mathematically incorrect, but you know, that's sort of up to your choice whether you want to include these rows or not. But for every row past that, we have the growth from 1 week ago. In fact, we could probably just flat out remove this column because we don't really need it anymore. And so now for every single day sales, we could see what the growth was from the equivalent day last week. Because having the equivalent growth from the previous day maybe won't make sense because it'll always look like, you know, on Saturdays when people aren't working, we're going to do a whole lot of business. And on Fridays, maybe people are at work, so we don't do as much business. So it's going to look like from Saturday to Friday that like we grew a whole bunch, but that's not really a good comparison. We want to compare Saturdays with Saturdays and Fridays with Fridays and that kind of thing. So this is a pretty good metric for that. And this is also a pretty good example of how you can use that row ID and referring to previous table combination to sort of grab, not in this case the previous row, but the row 7 rows before. Okay, well, I do hope that helped clear up the idea. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you next video.